Hi, and welcome back to the channel. My name's Kate and I'm an abstract landscape artist based in South Yorkshire. In this video, I'm going to talk about my top 5 tips for adding movement into abstract landscape paintings. I'll be covering the tricks and tools that I use to create dynamic scenes with acrylic paint and mixed media. First up, we have composition. And from the very start of a painting, you can add movement, just in the way that you are forming shapes in the composition. For example, a diagonal foreground already suggests movement because it shows a sense of direction and action for your eye to follow across the edge of the painting. When shapes are positioned diagonally, they seem to have motion across their surface. You can then contrast these diagonally positioned shapes with horizontal shapes to show opposing areas of motion. Such as in this painting from last week's video, there's a turbulent sky and that's forming over quite a serene and calm horizon line because it's very horizontal. A dynamic composition with elements weighted to one side can create the feeling of something about to move or in the midst of movement. You can position the shapes so that there's an imbalance which creates this tension and sense of movement. So in this piece there's all of these diagonal elements creating an imbalance which moves your eye from this corner of the painting to this lower corner. Next up is line work and pattern. And I add a lot of line work into my sketches, especially when I'm doing plein air work, as I want to remember if there was a strong wind blowing or there was movement in the trees, that kind of thing. And I love to try and capture the movement of water with line work. I usually do this as the last stage in my sketch with simple pencil lines over the top. In this sketch, the strong straight lines remind me that there was a really strong wind blowing, and it was blowing the sand across this beach, and I'll never forget that. These harsh straight lines really suggest dynamic movement, whereas long, sweeping, curving lines suggest a calmer and flowing sense of movement. Repeating elements and shapes in a pattern can also suggest movement, as it implies that the shape is moving from one position to another. At the moment, I'm not really using much pattern in my work, but it is something I've done in the past and enjoyed. Repeating marks, especially when they follow a certain rhythm, can simulate the repetition of movement, such as the movement of waves along the shoreline. The way that edges are treated can also suggest a sense of fluidity or stability. Soft edges are often used to describe fluid movement, where one element of the painting transitions smoothly into the other. This can evoke a sense of continuous movement, like the flow of water or the movement of air. Soft edges often feel quite gentle and can give the impression of things blending in together or changing seamlessly over time. Soft edges can also help to evoke a sense of energy or atmosphere and motion. A foggy or misty scene, for example, can have soft transitions between shapes, suggesting the movement of air, water, or light. The subtle, unfocused energy can imply that things are constantly changing. Hard edges, with their sharp definition, often create a sense of stillness, clarity, or emphasis on specific elements. However, when placed strategically, hard edges can also create movement by giving a sense of direction or force. For instance, sharp lines or contours can guide the viewer's eye across the painting, creating a sense of action or a pathway of motion. So hard edges can give strong directional movement, whereas blurred soft edges suggest a more dreamlike and calm movement. And a contrast of the two can really create a dynamic scene with lots of movement. Now moving on to directional marks, which I've been loving to incorporate into my paintings recently. Loose, expressive and energetic marks can create the feeling of urgency or speed, making it seem as though there is a lot of movement in a particular area. You can amplify this movement even more by contrasting tightly packed areas of smaller brushstrokes with large sweeping marks. The quality of the brushstrokes can also reflect the emotion or force behind the movement. Large swirling brushstrokes can give a sense of swirling wind or rain, and I love to try and visually imitate the natural forces in motion with the directions of my brushstrokes. They can then replicate this sensation of things like turbulent water or gusting winds, giving the painting a sense of constant motion. And lastly, we have splatters and texture, which can be highly effective tools in creating movement within a painting. When used intentionally, they can help to create energy, chaos, and dynamic action. The direction in which splatters land can give the illusion of movement. For instance, if splatters are scattered over a certain direction or grouped together in a way that mimics a flow, they suggest that something is moving or travelling across the painting. Using thick, textured paint, like impasto, can also convey physical energy. For example, the rough texture of swirling brushstrokes or thick layered paint can give the impression of movement by mimicking the force or weight behind an action. A textured surface often also feels more dynamic because it suggests a physicality to the movement. When splatters or texture are placed against smooth, flat areas, it gives a dynamic contrast. This juxtaposition can make the textured, splattered sections appear even more active, drawing the viewer's attention and increasing the sense of motion. The tension between these different areas can feel like a burst of energy. So I hope that these tips were useful on how to add movement into your abstract landscapes, and I'll perhaps do a demonstration of these in an upcoming video, if it's something you'd like to see. As always, thank you so much for watching, and see you again next week.